The Sonic Storybook games. They were a unique set of games back in the early 2000s that really just didn't have anything to do with the mainline Sonic series. Well, I guess you could technically say most Sonic games don't have much to do with one another. The Storybook games had a lot more emphasis on story, cause Storybook, compared to the other Sonic games. And what was different about them is the cutscenes were flat images that sometimes moved, and it was representing like almost a pop-up storybook. That also ties into the whole Storybook name. But obviously there's a lot more things that went into these games that I would say determine them being a Storybook Sonic game. I think I need to do a bit more research. I need to open up my web browser. Today's sponsor is Opera GX. Opera GX is a special version of the Opera browser built specifically for gamers. Opera GX is also available on mobile with GX Mobile, and it can be connected to the desktop version. Opera GX has so many great features, and I actually use it as my main browser. And if you are like me, you don't really want to restart and have to re-get everything. But no need to worry, because Opera GX allows you to bring over all of your Google Chrome extensions and bookmarks. And you can easily install any Google Chrome extension you want to Opera GX and it'll work just as normal. We also have GX Control. GX Control helps enhance performance on your PC while gaming. This panel allows you to limit the CPU, RAM, and network bandwidth that you're willing to let the browser use. It's really simple and easy. All you have to do is click the tab, check what you want to limit, and move the sliders. And as you can see when you do this, Opera is way less resource intensive than other browsers. Make sure you download Opera GX in the description and pinned comment below, because this is the best browser experience there is out there. Genuinely. After doing a bit more research, I've come to find some new things out about storybook games that I didn't actually know before. But what else makes a storybook game a storybook game? I feel like there's kind of a big elephant in the room, which is the gameplay. The game uses motion controls mainly for Sonic and the Secret Rings more so than in the Black Knight, as in the Black Knight you can use the nunchuck attachment for the Wii remote, and these games were somewhat on rails. I feel like Black Knight had a little bit more deviation at times for the pathways you could go. Sometimes it would be a left or right pathway, but mostly Sonic and the Secret Rings was pretty much an on-track going forward game with obstacles in your way, almost kind of like a temple run kind of game, but an actual game with an ending. And Black Knight still had this similar concept as Sonic and the Secret Rings of going forward for the most part, but again, you didn't have to literally lean the Wii remote sideways and forward in order to move forward. You just had a nunchuck or an analog stick where you could just move forward. But obviously in the games called the Storybook series, the gameplay is not the greatest part of the game. Because again, I feel like the emphasis was more on the story, and they more so just wanted to make gimmick games around this story. But I'm going to go ahead and throw all that out of the window. I don't think that really matters. The way that those games play aren't really that important to making them part of this series, in my personal opinion. I feel like it's everything else. Everything else about these games really stand out, whether it's the music or the themes, the tone. Those games, in my opinion, are really good at giving those to the player and really making you feel like they put love into this whole thing, except the gameplay. Now there's one other final elephant in the room that I say makes a storybook game a storybook game, basing it off of a real story, or elements of real stories. Sonic and the Secret Rings is based off the Arabian Nights stories, and there's characters in there like King Solomon, or Tails as Ali Baba, Knuckles as Sinbad, and then Eraser Jin of course as a genie. These are all based on real things. And then with Sonic and the Black Knight, obviously it's based off King Arthur and the Round Table, with Sir Lancelot, which is actually just Shadow, Gawain, Percival, and then of course with its own twists and turns with things like Merlina. And all of these elements make the Storybook series by taking real life stories and adapting them into their own Sonic form with original aspects. But even let's be honest here, the Storybook games are also just really swaggy. Like Sonic right here, it just turns into a brand new form, Dark Spine Sonic, which Kishimoto confirms is based off of a sports car. And then Sonic in the Black Knight, all these pieces of gold armor come together to form a supersonic-like armor and a really cool looking sword. Like, these games just have style, and that's really a big part of these games that separates them, in my opinion, from a lot of these other Sonic games endings. Like, don't get me wrong, they're both predictable games and both follow a similar formula with the whole brand new form thing at the end, but it's kind of a cool trend that I kind of wish kept going. Sonic getting a brand new form inside of a world that he doesn't belong, with real life story characters or references. It was a cool trend, even though the gameplay was kind of hit or miss for some people, and with Secret Rings it seems like a mostly miss. They could have done this in a different way. But what if I told you they kinda already have? Yes, some of you already know where this is going.
I'm here, reaching far across these new frontiers with my
Sonic Frontiers. Now wait, before you click off, this isn't bait, this isn't a joke, this isn't really a reach either. I have a few reasons why. Starting off with the smaller reasons. Morio Kishimoto himself. As you know, he is the director of Sonic Frontiers, but he was also the lead game designer on Sonic and the Secret Rings and Sonic and the Black Knight. He may have not been the director of those games, but he led the game design. And he was very much involved with almost the entirety of the game. So a lot of things will probably end up making sense going forward explaining that fact. Like, come on now, guys. Do you see the covers for Sonic and the Secret Rings and Black Knight? And do you see this poster for Frontiers? Do you see this Sonic render? Come on now. Let's be honest, this is definitely storybook vibes. But something that is very important about Sonic Frontiers being considered a storybook game is the emphasis on the story. Sonic Frontiers is very much more story emphasized compared to previous Sonic games in probably the last 10 years. It has the most in-depth character development probably in the entire franchise. You spend a lot of time with characters one-on-one just talking and them growing and talking about their future plans and how they want to improve. Overall, this has a greater story focus. And trust me, I know that alone doesn't make it a storybook game, but we'll get there. This is just a piece to the bigger puzzle. So one of the key factors to making a storybook game is it being based off of or inspired by a real life story. And you may be like, dang, sorry Jayden, we got you there. See, not a storybook game, this is a completely original story. Or so you thought. A person on Twitter was asking Kishimoto story-related questions, and then Kishimoto responded to them saying, "We're glad that you liked the game. I wasn't particularly conscious of Persona 3 when creating the plot of the story. The plot is inspired by a Japanese folktale, so I don't know if you know it, but it's a story called Rabbit in the Moon." And as you guys know, or as Kishimoto said, it's a Japanese folktale that's really popular for its imagery. There's a quick synopsis I found online. One night, the man on the moon came down to Earth disguised as a beggar. He chanced upon a fox, a monkey, and a rabbit, and asked for some food. The fox brought him some fish from a stream, and the monkey brought fruit from the trees, but the rabbit could only offer grass. So he told the beggar to build a fire, and when it was built, threw himself onto the flames to offer himself to the man. Amazed by the rabbit's generosity, the beggar transformed back into the man on the moon and pulled the rabbit from the fire. To honor the rabbit's kindness, the man on the moon carried the rabbit back to the moon to live with him. Now, if you look at the full moon, you can see the outline of the rabbit pounding mochi on the moon. Now, I think the message and takeaway from this story is that being overly kind is something that will get you rewarded and is really valued. And you can see these themes present throughout the entire character arc of Sage, where Sage is initially an AI meant to destroy Sonic, and then eventually watches his ways and sees how kind he is towards his friend, and Sage grows from watching him, and then eventually becomes a good AI and does the right thing in the end. And just like the rabbit, Sage tries to sacrifice herself to stop the end. And then obviously Eggman's very sad at the end because he thinks Sage is lost, but then he seems to have a new backup chip of Sage or whatever, and we have no idea what's going to happen with that, but it's kind of a similar pattern. So I can see the inspiration from the rabbit on the moon. It's a storybook in the sense of it follows the patterns of this folktale, but it isn't really blatant. It's kind of a hidden thing within the story. And there's also other factors such as Sonic getting transported to a different world, in this case cyberspace. And hey, if you really do want to count it, there are storybook moments with 2D flat images, almost literally Sonic and the Black Knight and Secret Ring style within this game. Sonic Frontiers very much has DNA from the storybook series, whether it's the renders taking from real life stories and folklore, emphasis on story, using book-like images for some cutscenes, and a lot more. He doesn't get a cool super form in the end, but I will say this. The whole supersonic aspect of Sonic Frontiers gives me a lot of vibes of the storybook games with the supersonic boss fights in those games. It has the same amount of cool edge with heavy rock music going on in the background, and just cooking the enemies and the bosses in such a cool way. It's almost the same kind of energy. I literally have zero issue with calling Sonic Frontiers the third storybook game, and it's for all these reasons I talked about in this video. And if you guys disagree, let me know in the comments below, because I think this is a storybook game, or the closest thing to it that we'll ever probably get again. And fun fact, if you didn't know this, there was actually a poll on a Sega Facebook page in Europe asking what the next Sonic storybook game should be, and Greek mythology won the poll. Even though they never did anything with it, and it was probably just for fun, it was the thing that happened. So that could have been used and given back to Sega to maybe help them decide if they wanted to make another storybook game. But it seems like Kishimoto slid in his secret storybook game throughout Sonic Frontier. And honestly, I'm a fan. But anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And like always, I'll see you in the next one.
Well, whatever happens, happens.